Exclusive member content brought to you proudly by SMERocketfuel.com.
Your customers are how you find out if your solutions that very likely, honestly, came from your engineers actually work. When I say work, means they'll buy it, they can figure out how to use it. That's what we mean. So it's subtle, it's more subtle. So a lot of overly simplistic things, people think, you just go out to your customers and you develop it with them, and it doesn't work. And this is why it doesn't work.
How's it, guys? So today we're going to talk about tech and product development specifically. So the question for today is as follows. How do today's most successful tech companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix, and Tesla design, develop, and deploy the products that have earned the love of literally billions of people around the world? If you could know what these kind of successful approaches are when it comes to building and designing successful tech products, if you knew what these kind of secrets were or what they do practically on a day-to-day basis to build these incredible products, what would it mean for your business? So today we are joined by Marty Cagan. He is the founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group, and he has written two books. One's called Empowered, and the other one is called Inspired, which is all around how to create tech products that customers really love. It's got like some ridiculous amount of 5-star reviews on Amazon. And so we're going to be talking about all things software development, product marketing, user experience design, software testing, engineering management, and general management, etc. Marty is just a gold mine of information about this space, and he consults to the likes of Google's engineering teams as a case in point. And guys, there's just so much here, so I don't want to labor this intro too much, but pay careful attention, guys, where he talks about the role of engineers in a business and how the role of an engineer is fundamentally misunderstood. But if you understand it, it can truly unlock the next level of growth in your product for your business. So without further ado, guys, enter Marty Cagan. So hello. Welcome to yet another cracking installment of the Map Round Show. Today I'm joined by yet another incredible talent all the way from the US. Marty, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
So it's Marty Cagan, everybody. Today we're going to talk about all things tech and product. Marty, you are the author of a very cool book, which I'm going to bring up on screen here, called Empowered, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Products. And you're from the Silicon Valley Product Group. So there's so much I want to get into with you today, Marty. Do you want to maybe give us the elevator pitch? Like, who are you? What are you focused on? What lights you up? Anything of the sorts. What do we need to know?
Sure. Well, I have been in the tech industry since college. I joined right out of college, and I started as an engineer. I was writing software for HP Labs. You would consider it the Google of the day. It was the most consistently innovative company, a great place to work. But anyway, I learned how to do products there, technology products, and then I was very lucky. I was early at Netscape. Netscape was the original internet company. And then I was also the original head of product and design at eBay, which I'm sure you've heard of. And then after eBay, I just wanted to, with the industry people, we started Silicon Valley Product Group really as a way to work with startups, work with small companies that had big ideas, but didn't necessarily know how to go about pursuing those ideas. And we do advising, investing, and writing. I started writing right away, actually. And my first book was called Inspired, How to Create Tech Products Customers Love. And it sort of surprised me by how many people were interested in that. I guess my focus has always been the difference between how the best companies build products and how most companies build products. And that's where I was, very lucky to be in a good product company for most of my career. And then, but when I went out into the broader world, I realized that most companies are not so fortunate. They work very differently. And anyway, so Inspired was around helping share those techniques that great teams use, teams at Google, at Amazon, at Apple, at Netflix, Slack, companies like that. And then and then I realized there was an even bigger problem out there, which is that a lot of leaders don't know how good companies work, so they don't allow their teams to work the way they need to. And that's really been the focus of my work for the last few years. And in fact, the book you just mentioned, Empowered, is coming out in just a few weeks. That is aimed at leaders. So product Inspired was really aimed at product teams, and Empowered is aimed at product leaders.
Cool. I've got them both up on screen here. So it's very interesting your background. As a technology group ourselves, very much focused on product and so forth. As I mentioned to you before we went live, I think in many cases, I should say maybe go back a step. I think as a community of technology people, we've gotten better at it. If you think about, you mentioned Netscape, the early browser, etc. Versus the browsers that we use now, Chrome, etc. I think, as a community of designers, product people, I think we've started to get better at designing great platforms, interfaces, and all that kind of stuff. But still, having said that, in many cases, we get it wrong. I'd love to get your view, Marty, whether it's inspired or empowered, you can go from here. But where does it go wrong in most cases? So if we've got like a startup, here in Johannesburg, wherever they might be, Amsterdam, London, etc., they're looking to build a tech product. They've got a fantastic idea. They're drinking their own Kool-Aid. What do they need to know about where they're probably going to go wrong?
Yeah, it's a big question. And I should emphasize, and by the way, I've been to Johannesburg, I've been to Cape Town, I've been with tech companies all over the world. I love that. One of the things I've really learned is that some people think that, oh, if you're not in Silicon Valley or New York or Seattle, you can't, you just don't have the environment you need to do great products. And it's just so not true. A lot of the best companies I know in the world are scattered all over the world. And I will also emphasize, I know terrible companies in San Francisco and New York and Seattle also. So it's not about location at all. I would say, though, one of the things that's hard about product is that it's not so much where you can go wrong, it's that almost everything has to go right for it to succeed. So there are so many, and I would also argue, plus a nice dose of good luck needs to be there too. And so in one sense, it's kind of remarkable how many companies do succeed, because there really are so many places that you can go wrong. Almost where do you start for the common problems? When I meet startups, one of the classic problems is the founders, we say, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. You may have heard that, yes. But it's but it's really true. I find that so often you have founders that have been thinking about a solution for literally years. They're so excited, they finally get a little money, or they sell something and they've got enough money to start a little company. And they put all their blood, sweat, and tears into this one solution, and then customers don't like it. Happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And well, the sad thing was that they didn't have the skills to know how to go about that right, especially because very often their original purpose was a good one. Mm-hmm. They really were trying to meet some real need. The problem was the first idea that came to mind to them on how to solve it was not actually a winning solution. It's actually very hard to come up. A winning solution is like threading a needle. It needs to be something that customers just love and want to buy and want to own and want to use. It also needs to be something they can figure out how to use. It also needs to be something that you can technically build with the technology that's available, with the team you have, the skill sets, the technology stack, the time. And it also has to be, for most of us, it has to be something that's legal, something that is compliant with local laws. It has to be something that you can afford to market, you can afford to sell, you can afford to pay for, you can monetize. I mean, those are a lot of hoops to jump through to get a solution that works. When you kind of view it through that lens, what can go wrong? Any of those things can go wrong.
So not much then. We wonder why 50% of businesses fail. You know what I'm saying? It should be like 90% fail. Just get used to it. Like, I mean, just a funny story from my side. I mean, there's so much that you've said resonates with me, which is fantastic. You know, I think also you mentioned falling in love with the problem over again. Like I actually believe now that the problem moves. So when you found a company, you think, cool, I'm going to go and solve this problem. Not in all cases, but in some cases, especially where it's not a problem that you uniquely have and you're kind of building the solution for you. But where you think there's a gap in the market, as an example, and you build a business, you solve that problem, but then you realize that actually, you know, the problem isn't there anymore. It's actually a little bit off center. There's a bigger problem over there. It's related. And so your problem starts to move. But here you've got a product, right, that's built to solve one particular use case, which is great for scale. I mean, I had Jeffrey Moore on the show not too long ago, you know, speaking about this whole idea about, you know, crossing the chasm, and you got to solve for one use case, etc. But if you start to scale, you got to start to solve more and more problems, right? And so to your point, if you don't have the right executional capabilities, the team, the work and capital, the cash flow and all that kind of stuff, it's very likely that you have a very high chance of failure, right? And so this whole, I wanted to use that preamble to talk about this idea of getting out of the building, because it's another thing that you touched on. You know, do you develop with your customer, or do you deliver in isolation? And at what point do you start to do this? So Eric Ries, the lean startup, you know, you document your assumptions, you kind of then figure out and you validate that with, in the case of a marketplace, the end customer and the vendor, whatever the story is for you. But inevitably, you know, the idea is that you develop your product with your customer. So don't build it in isolation, etc. What have you learned about the, you know, adaptable frameworks for product development? What works, what doesn't work? Do you feel like, you know, Eric Ries and the lean startup is a lot of fluff? Like, what do we need to know?
No, I mean, it's, in fact, The Lean Startup is a very important book I make sure everybody reads. But it is also true that most people don't understand what he's trying to explain there. They get it, they misunderstand it so frequently. And of course, he didn't come up with those concepts. He based it on other work that I've also, there's some great early work that was done. Steve Blank, of course, is where a lot of that came from, and even before that. But this is where it gets a little tricky, and stop me if I go into the weeds a little too much here. But the fundamentally, there are two truths. You absolutely have to engage with real users and customers in order to figure out a good solution. There's no question. And that's where the get outside of the building comes from. But the other side of it, which is really even a deeper and more profound side, is that you will never get a great solution by listening to your customers. And there's a fundamental reason for that, really two, but the most basic one is that your customers, your users don't know what's possible. That's what's really special about technology-powered products, is what is just now possible is always changing. You probably remember before he died, Steve Jobs loved to hold up his iPhone and say, you can conduct 100 focus groups, you will never get an iPhone. In Jeff Bezos's annual shareholder letter, he likes to remind people, just want to remind people, not a single person asked for Amazon Prime. So your customers are not where you find these solutions. Your customers are how you find out if your solutions, that very likely, honestly, came from your engineers, actually work. When I say work, means they'll buy it, they can figure out how to use it. That's what we mean. So it's subtle, it's more subtle. So a lot of overly simplistic things, people think, you know, oh, you just go out to your customers and you develop it with them, and just, it doesn't work. And this is why it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a really good thing, because we're, as a company ourselves, we're pivoting into like a whole different space. And we just had literally now before this podcast, we 12 of us in a boardroom, like documenting this up. We literally threw away the whole previous idea we were going to launch with, in the pursuit of, like, you know, something that's truly different in category making. And this actual point that you mentioned came up, funny enough, literally like the glasses are still half full here on the table. One of those ideas was, you know, this is so different to everything else out there. How are you going to convince this particular type of vendor to depart with an like, for them, it's like, give me free licenses. Okay. No. You know what I mean? I'm not going to do that. But you're like, hang on a second. We're going to give you ownership in this massive, massive thing. So anyway, I'm not giving away too much, but I will later in a consequent episode, because we're still kind of refining it. It changes as we go. But the kind of point I'm making here is that, it's so aggressive. It's so different. Just like the iPhone was. It's like, I watched a clip, funny enough, Marty, of Steve Ballmer. He was interviewed by the media, and this lady says to him, "So Steve, what do you think of the iPhone? Have you seen that?" And he goes, "Well, it doesn't even have a keyboard. I mean, it's not appropriate for business customers." And he was like, $500? $500 for that? Well, let me just tell you, we've got a Windows phone and it's $99. I think I know what our strategy will be.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons there for sure. And in fact, he was a salesperson, not a product person.
Yeah.
And you can just look at Microsoft's track record before him under Bill Gates and after him under Satya, and you can see the difference that causes. And I'm not suggesting he's a bad person, but that is not what you want to lead a technology powered company. And this really gets to the heart of that. So the other thing I would mention, just because of what you're saying, another really common problem that really is sad to me is so many startups give up too soon. They give up too early. They think they've got their idea, and of course they pursue it. And 6 months later, they're like, "Yeah, it doesn't work. We need to pivot." And I'm like, 6 months? Come on, give me. Normally takes years of hard work. And this is another area where people really misunderstand lean startup. They build an MVP in 6 months. 6 months is incredibly long to do an MVP. We can do an MVP typically in days, if not weeks. So, and then that means we can try our idea. We could try 50 versions of our idea in 6 months. That is not that hard, actually. But again, now you're pointing out that the team really needs some skills. They need to know how to work like this. And this is where we'll get to the difference between so many successful companies and not successful companies. Is the successful ones didn't guess right on their first try. It's that they had the skills to converge on a good solution, and they didn't give up halfway there.
Yeah, it's so true though. There's a saying, just on the last episode, there was a saying, it's like, it takes 15 years to make a quick buck, or it takes like 10 years to be an overnight success. But it's fascinating though. I've been doing a lot of research into marketplaces, and I came across an article on Airbnb's growth hacking on growthhacking.com. And it's fascinating how you can, if you go to Airbnb now, it's just so worlds apart from what they launched with, which was literally a blog post with apartment listings. But they iterated, and they went and they like scraped a whole bunch of listings from Craigslist. I don't know if you're familiar with that whole story. And then it was like a proper hack, which is super smart for them. I mean, ethical or not, very, very smart. So they ramped up their supply side of their marketplace very, very quickly. And then they kind of iterated over time, and they introduced wish lists and all sorts of cool things. But I'm using that story to kind of talk about, in the lean startup as an example, I believe, and I speak under correction here, Marty, but there's this idea of MVP, or minimum viable product. So you should launch with your worst product possible, and then you improve it over time in collaboration with your customer, right?
That's not really, that's the misunderstanding that many people have.
Great.
Yeah,
go.
Because launching with the worst product possible doesn't get you anything. What we, other than a really bad response, and then people eventually just give up. So you really need to think through, what does it mean to be viable? A viable product can actually, you're looking to sustain a business. So there are different definitions of MVP that you can use. There's because Eric Ries's one and the original one are not the same. But the point here is that we are trying to test our ideas as fast and quick as possible. And most of the time, we can do that using different kinds of prototypes. In fact, the best thing you can do is think of MVP never as a product, which is some half-baked thing that nobody likes, right? And then you're going to somehow, improve it off of something that people hate. That's not helpful. Think of it as instead as something much, much faster we can do, much sooner, in days and weeks, to see specific risks. So for example, is this something people would pay for? Is this something they could figure out how to use? Is this something our engineers can build? Is this something our salespeople can sell or our lawyers will say is okay? That's really what we're trying to do. So you mentioned Airbnb, which is a great example, terrific product company. But they almost went out of business right before, very early. They came this close to running out of money, and they really learned this idea that it's very different to figure out a winning solution versus building a winning solution. And they came the idea of a hack. The idea of the hack is good because it lets you see if this is anything people would want. And if it is something they want, then you can build it out and invest the money. In fact, at Airbnb, they like to frame things as, while we're figuring out the product, what I refer to as product discovery, they refer to as building things that don't scale. Mm-hmm. And then once you do figure that out, then you build things that do scale. So they're trying to do that separate. And notice, spending 6 months to build a half-assed product that you want to call an MVP that people hate, that's not either. That's basically way too slow to figure out the right solution. And it's also not a product anybody's going to buy.
Totally. 100%. So the contrary idea to you, what you're saying and describing for me is like an exceptional viable product. So it's like, if you imagine two pyramids, right? You got layers in the pyramid. What a MVP idea is where you just take the top layer and you build that first. You don't think about usability, all the other things in the pyramid. But with an exceptional viable product, you're kind of cutting across the layers down from the top of the pyramid, right? So you're getting all the things that you need to get right as part of an EVP. Does that kind of resonate with you conceptually?
Not really.
No? God, I was almost in there, Marty. I'm trying to sell you something.
Yeah, it's not there. The best thing you can do is forget about the concept of MVP because your mind is so corrupted by these misunderstandings. The best thing you can do is think, okay, we're going to create prototypes in order to test our assumption. Once we have tested our assumptions, then we'll build a product. So what really, if you think of MVP as minimum viable prototype, and then the product is product market fit, which is really what you're after, right? Product market fit is something you can really sell and get money for and really have a business on. So that's the goal. That's the goal. And then the question is, you've got all these assumptions. So I would argue you're off to the good start. You've identified a bunch of assumptions. But now the real question is, you need to test each of those assumptions quickly. And when I say quickly, it's normally in days. You're not going to do that by doing some slice through that's going to take any slice through anything. Even more importantly, most of the time we can test those assumptions without using our engineers at all. There's something to think about. Most of the time we can test those assumptions by using designers and the prototypes that designers create.
So rapid prototyping, what are some of the tools that I suppose we don't even need to be going into the prototype space in theory. In theory, you could just pick up the phone and validate, you can,
but that's actually called demand validation.
Yeah.
But even demand validation, it's hard for them, hard for a customer to really know what they're buying if they don't see a prototype in many cases. So we do normally do a lot of prototyping, and demand is one of the most important things. If demand is not there, then what's the point, right? If they're not interested in that problem being solved. But I'll tell you, the hard part about product is not really demand. That part is easy for us to test and make sure that what we build, there will be a market for. The hard part, in truth, is the demand is there. The problem is they don't like your solution. The customers don't like it. One of my favorite product thinkers, you've probably heard of Ben Horowitz. He's with Mark Andreessen. And Ben likes to say, yeah, that's what's so hard about product, is to get people to switch to your product. It's got to be on the order of 10 times better. Mm-hmm. Like Airbnb was on the order of 10 times better than what its alternatives were. Slack on the order of 10 times better than what the alternatives were. Google search, Apple's iPhone, these are all significantly better. And that's what's hard about product, coming up with something that's that much better, even though demand is not a question. We've always had demand for search. We've always had demand for a phone. We've always had demand for, something like AWS. But what was hard was coming up with a solution that worked well enough that people would actually switch. And that's why most of our effort to build a successful product is prototyping the solution.
Yeah, I love that. I love that point. So like in a marketplace, as an example, you've got supply and then you've got demand, right? So you always build supply first, right? Because the demand will always be there. Is that a way to kind of, and another way to paraphrase and articulate kind of what you're saying?
A little bit, maybe. Mark, I do love marketplaces and we've worked on them since the beginning of them. I mean, eBay was kind of the original large scale marketplace, but so I love them. But the marketplaces are almost never like that, where you just do supply and then demand will come. That we really have to worry about what's called marketplace health, which is the dynamics between the two. It is true that it's usually harder on one side of that marketplace or another. Like it might be the demand side, it might be the supply side, whatever's harder. We'll often spend a lot more of our effort there, and we can, but we have to kind of bring those up together. And that's called marketplace development, where you are bringing them up, because obviously a marketplace that has a ton of supply and no demand, you're going to lose your supply immediately.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Can you maybe double down on marketplace health? Maybe can you characterize what you mean by that exactly?
Well, sure. I mean, this applies really in all marketplaces, whether it's a dating site, which it sounds crude, but those are marketplaces, right? A dating site that just has men is not going to be very interesting, right? So you don't think of supply and demand with a marketplace, with the dating site. You think of, potential partners. And so if you go to a dating site and there's nobody interesting to date, it's a totally useless marketplace. Jobs is a more typical example. If I'm looking for a job and I go to this cool marketplace that does all this marketing and advertising to me, and then there's no jobs, then I go somewhere else. If I'm an employer and I post my job, but there's nobody looking for a job on this marketplace, is not very useful. I'll go post it somewhere else. So these are, or Uber, we can talk about rides rather. We can talk about places to stay at Airbnb. We need both sides to go. In fact, this is what, in general, Uber is not, I don't like to talk about Uber too much because I'm not crazy about their ethics, but as far as developing local marketplaces, they really set the bar on how to do that well.
What do you find, if there was one, what is the secret sauce to a successful marketplace outside of the obvious? Must have supply, must have demand. And maybe you could tackle it at a platform level, considering you were, heavily involved at product design at eBay. I mean, what were some of the things that you implemented at a platform level, considering we're talking about product, that you feel are easy wins for, marketplacepreneurs around the world to be aware of and can implement? What do you feel some of those things could be?
Well, is not easy. In fact, marketplaces are among the hardest kind of products to do well, but I love them because unlike most products, when you get a marketplace that really resonates, gets traction, product market fit, whatever you'd like to call this, you're really hard to displace. There are marketplaces still in place in the world that are far from the best, but they get these network effects that are so valuable. But frankly, marketplaces are very hard products to do well because it's not just one product, it's at least two. Sometimes we even have three-sided marketplaces. And so you have to do a great job for more than one, and you have to do those at the same time so that you can, and then you have to nurture this marketplace. It's almost like a garden. You've got to constantly worry about those marketplace health things. So like now you've got a supply issue. We have to really get better at supply. Now we've got a demand issue. We have to ramp up demand. So they're not easy. Most marketplaces, obviously people love marketplaces because you can really have a great business if you get there. But it is, in general, in my experience, harder to get there on a marketplace than it is for conventional products.
Okay. What would you suggest are absolute non-negotiables for marketplace businesses? For instance, do you focus on one country? Do you niche? What are some of those considerations, non-negotiables from your perspective?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, realize that there are many kinds of marketplaces right there. You're bringing up a really important difference. We talk about global marketplaces versus local marketplaces. So eBay, for example, is a global marketplace. Etsy is a global marketplace. These let you buy and sell from anyone, anywhere. However, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, those are local marketplaces. So that means that even if Uber has all kinds of drivers in San Francisco, if I'm in Cape Town and there's no drivers, it's a totally useless marketplace to me. So these are very different kinds of dynamics and different kinds of products. Of course, the demand side might be the fact that, okay, well, I traveled from San Francisco to Cape Town. That's a good thing. Maybe I at least know that maybe there is this service. But for the most part, just because you've built supply in one part of the world doesn't mean it helps you in the rest of the world. So these are just some of the dynamics that are different. And you can see these are radically different kinds of businesses.
Absolutely, absolutely. Your book, Empowered, speaks quite at length and inspired, by the way, about great tech companies: Amazon, Google, Facebook, rather, Netflix, Tesla, etc. What are some? You mentioned these techniques. Are there any techniques that you feel are used by these incredibly successful tech companies that outside of the areas that we've discussed that potentially are a little bit unknown? Could be ways of working, could be anything either around like in market validation, whatever the case might be. What are they doing to be so successful? What do other entrepreneurs not see from your perspective?
No, it's a perfect question, really, because that you just summarized what I'm interested in, and this is what I focus on. I'm going to answer that with something that may surprise you, but to me is the single most important difference between all those companies you just mentioned, plus lots more. Spotify's a great example of what I'll describe, and the rest. And what I'm about to say I can't tell you how many founders I meet that are shocked by this because it's so against what's in their heads. And that is the idea of the role of an actual engineer, what an engineer does for the company. In most companies, not the good ones, the engineers are viewed as like, yeah, you hire some developers, big deal. In fact, we can even use contractors. I know some really inexpensive contractors, or we'll use an agency, or we'll hire Accenture, and they'll build what we tell them to build. And in contrast, in all the other exceptional companies I know, it's a completely different model. In fact, there was one of my favorite quotes of Steve Jobs was he would say that we don't hire all these smart people in order to tell them what to do. We hire all these smart people so they can show us what's possible. And fundamentally, this is right at the core of the difference I see. In a not a good company, the founders or the leaders or the stakeholders tell the teams what features they want them to build. In a great company, they don't do that. They give them problems to solve. They literally say, look, the problem is our customers won't do this, or the problem is we can't get the packages delivered to the right place at the right time, or the problem is our customers are totally confused on this area. Figure it out. Now, that sounds so elemental, but it really is fundamentally different. it gets down to the role. I mean, fundamentally, it gets down to the role of your people that you hire. Are they there to solve problems for, and own those problems, or are they just there to do your bidding, to build what the founder tells them to build? And I can tell you that's not that way in the best companies. They are literally trying to tap into the brains of their people. Remember what we started with. The engineers are the ones that know what's just now possible. The leaders almost never do. Steve Jobs didn't know. He had great product sense. He had great understanding of intuitions about customers. And he was willing to make some big bets, like we talked about earlier, like on a 100% touchscreen device. But the reason the iPhone happened was because they had engineers and designers that were empowered to figure out really hard problems. And they did. And that's true. If you want to know how is it that Spotify is able to do so well against so many very tough competitors, that's why. Same with these other great companies.
Yeah, I want to double down on that, on the Spotify story, because I'm a subscriber. I use that platform all the time. And I actually was thinking the other day, I was like, I wonder why they made it. Like out of all the like iTunes and why would they like successful? Maybe let's just tackle that now, and then I'll tell you a story about Steve Jobs that you probably already know. But what is your view on Spotify here, Marty? Like, why have they been successful? I mean, you mentioned problems, etc. The role of the engineer versus the leaders, etc. Like, what is the Spotify story that we don't know?
Well, I am a fan of Spotify for sure. And a lot of people get confused because they confuse Spotify's kind of known for ways of organizing and their own sort of nomenclature, but people miss what's important there. It's not that. What Spotify is awesome at is giving engineers autonomy and empowerment, is basically hiring smart people, giving them hard problems and letting them go after it. That really is, in my opinion, what they're good at. I mean, I first met them more than a decade ago in Stockholm. They have optimized. In fact, this was among our first discussions I had with them. They have optimized their work environment for engineers to be able to solve hard problems. And that means that when you optimize for one thing, it often comes at the expense of other things. I'm also a Spotify customer, by the way, like you. And, it's not hard for, especially several years ago, to see consequences of that. Things that were amazing in one sense, but overall weren't so beautiful, weren't so amazing, like subscriptions, for example. And that's the kind of acceptable consequence of really going deep on empowering your engineers. And by the way, I was having the same discussions with teams at Google about the exact same thing. Google also sets the dial for engineers to very high level of empowerment and is willing to pay the price for that in terms of other areas that aren't as optimized. And I really think that is the reason, because look, Spotify has been able to hold their own against Apple and Amazon, two of the best product companies in the entire world. So that earns my respect. That's for sure.
Yeah, totally. That story, we're talking about empowering your engineers to solve really hard problems. So have you read Steve Jobs, his book, his autobiography? I know there's more than one, but
Isaacson one you're probably talking about.
Yeah, that's the one. But there was the story that he basically said to his, his engineers, listen, when they're building the iPod, he said, I want it very, very thin. I wanted the smallest, thinnest, razor thin product imaginable. And so they're like, no problem. And they go away and they come back with what they feel is a prototype. So Steve's there and all the engineers are there and they go, here's the iPod. And he looks it up and he's like, but there's air in it. And the engineers are like, there is no air. It's impossible. We squeezed every single spare space out of that thing. There is no air in there. And there was a fish tank and he threw he threw the thing into the fish tank and bubbles came up and he went, you see, air, make it smaller. Which was amazing for me because it paints this picture which we're talking about at the moment around, the relationship between leadership and then your engineering team. Like I've got a small team, 2 engineers. But nonetheless, as the leader, you want to empower them. And I'd love to get your views. Like, as a leader, how do you go about enabling them? You understand, like culturally, or go and fail, like totally mess this up, or whatever the case is. Because as you said, there are consequences in other areas, especially when you're a smaller company who doesn't have the luxury of a Google. Fail 40% of the time in a startup, you're probably not going to make it. But anyway, nonetheless, what are some of the things that leadership or team leaders need to know about empowering engineers to go and solve those really hard problems?
Well, I mean, that's the classic example. You've got a founder, you've got a couple engineers. Normally, I try to convince them to add a designer into the mix, depending on the kind of product. But that's a typical founding team, which I love. This is sort of I love this scenario, and I hope you enjoy as much of it as you can. But there are the two different ways of working. So many of the founders I know, they think in their head that their job is to specify and define the features, and the engineers are just there to code. And instead, I try to get them to think, no, you're really a true team together. And the engineers know what's possible. As a founder, you care about really two things. Is this ultimately going to be valuable enough for people to choose to use or buy? And also, is it viable? Can we build a business on this? But your designer is going to know much more than you do typically about usability, and your engineers are going to know much more than you do typically about what we can build. And so what you want to do is bring that together. It is, I would argue a true startup working the way we're talking about is its pure form of collaboration, as you're going to find. It's real collaboration, but it does require, I mean, you started this conversation by asking what are reasons, that people fail, and arrogance is one of the biggest ones. The founder who thinks he or she knows what the answer is, but he doesn't. I'd say one of the things that's really made me much better at doing product is learning that most of my ideas are wrong. It's just the truth. And the people that are good at finding out which ideas are good and which are bad quickly are the ones that succeed.
What are some of the attributes around that? Because I mean, this kind of comes up all the time. No, you must solve the problem and etc. It's like even all the, as we touched on in the beginning, MVP and then EVP, and then you got product market fit, and then someone will go, no, it's not product market fit, it's problem market fit. And so there's so many different counter arguments for the same thing. So I'd love to get your views on, like, how do you know? Like, obviously there's some basic ones and obvious ones, like, well, there's revenue. So someone's prepared to pay for it. But what are some of the other things that you see are great feedback mechanisms and or attributes that indicate that you have problem market fit or product market fit? Like, walk us through what some of those things are.
Well, you're right to observe there's all kinds of ridiculous religion out there when it comes to, everybody's got their favorite framework and everybody's got their favorite technique. In my opinion, I try to teach people that none of them are right. None of them. There is no silver bullet. There is no one technique. Any good team needs to be skilled in a broad range of techniques. And fundamentally, what you're asking is, how do we know we're getting somewhere? What is our measure? And our measure is real results, not output. So just shipping features is not success. And that's what people often confuse. They think, well, look, the boss told me to build these 2 features and get them out by the end of the month. I did. I've done my job. No, you haven't done anything. That's just output. The real question is, if the reason you are adding those features is because today, 12% every month, we have this crazy high churn rate. In other words, people try it in our trial and then they say, forget this. Getting that down to a reasonable few percent is probably more important than anything else for that business. And unless they do that, and until they do that, they haven't done anything. And so that's how we measure result. Every business has certain KPIs, is the term we use, key performance indicators. And they're not surprises. They're things like revenue. They're things like growth. These are ways we can use to measure product market fit. but one way or another, they're real business things. They're not activity. That's what a lot of people that don't get this do. They come up with something, a measure that they feel like, but I'm in control of this. I've had teams tell me that we are doing weekly releases, so we're an awesome team. I'm like, no. Yes. Should you do weekly releases, or better yet, daily constant releases? Yes. But does that make you awesome? No. You've got to actually be doing something that matters in those releases. So unless you're solving real problems for your business or for your customers, you're not doing much. You're just busy, but you're not doing much. And so every business has these KPIs. It's usually what's talked about with the board. And this is what good product teams focus on.
Absolutely. I want to talk about stakeholder management. I just got quite a few comments here from social media. This one, Craig Collins on LinkedIn, says that the point that you're making is so important. Great engineers are the difference between hacked together apps and poorly designed scalable products. Keith on Facebook, he says execution is everything and a lot of patience. So thank you for that, Keith. But we're talking about stakeholder management here, I guess. And I love this thing because I'm a marketing background guy, right? I dig marketing. I create demand pretty much all day and then sell that as well. But you talk about features and benefits, especially in technology products, etc. And then I had Christopher Lockett on the show not too long ago, and he's all about category design. You know what I'm saying? So it's not about the features and benefits, that they're buying in many cases, and the white space that you occupy as a product platform. And so I wanted to ask you, in the context of stakeholder management, Marty, if you have a product engineering team, and then you got a product marketing team, and then you got sales, how does that whole engagement become a fluid, effective one, as opposed to one where, as you said, this feature should not go to market, or whatever the case is? There could be a miscommunication, or you take the wrong thing to market at the wrong time, etc. What do we need to know about internal stakeholder management when it comes to the release of either features, benefits, and trying to get new customers to adopt, on your product and platform?
Okay, well, there's a lot in there for sure. There are, of course, many kinds of stakeholders in a business. Legal is a stakeholder, CEO, the board, sales, marketing. But your question, I think, is getting at the dynamics between product marketing, and sales. And that's a really super important dynamic, especially if you have direct sales. If you don't have direct sales, it's a little less, but still, if you do, it's a big one. So there's a lot of old thinking out there about that. In fact, there are still companies in the world, I still occasionally run into them, that think it's the job of marketing to define products. Hopefully, you guys aren't one of them, but because that's very obsolete. But that is not really their job. Now, product, when I think you said the phrase product engineering. Yes, there is a typical product team, which is often a founder, but it can be a product manager, a designer, and some number of engineers. And they are responsible for defining, designing, delivering the product. Product marketing helps us get that product to market. Now, they are a major input to the product, certainly. For example, they understand the channels. They understand the go-to-market constraints and considerations. And they're also a major output, right? Because if they don't understand what this product is, they can't provide the sales tools. They can't enable the sales force. So there's a very close and critical relationship with product marketing, which in truth is a little different if it's a consumer product versus a direct sales business product, but still this principle applies. So there are many techniques to answer your question. My favorite one is actually one that Steve Blank has been a big champion of for years. I think we both learned them at the same places, but the idea is, you don't ask your sales and marketing organization to start selling and marketing something until the product organization has proven they have a product that people want to buy and will be successful with. The main way, or one of the main ways we do that, is with referenceable customers. In other words, that initial set of customers that are using the product for real, not in a trial, but for real. They're using it to run their business or their life. And they've paid for it for real. And they love it so much they're willing to tell others how much they love it. That's a reference customer. Having a set of those reference customers in the same market is one of the powerful ways we define product market fit. But once we get that, then we want to ramp up sales and marketing. Spending a bunch of money on marketing programs and salespeople is usually a huge waste of time and money if you don't have product market fit yet. So we want to make sure we are timing things so that we get the most out of the sales organization. And by the way, it's easy to see. It shows up in sales costs, marketing costs, and sales cycle times. If you don't have referenceable customers by the time you start really actively selling, you're going to see that all through. You'll also see it in unhappy customers.
Is it fair to say, Marty, that, my mind's kind of jumped back now to where we were before around what are the sort of attributes that determine when you are in a particular stage, like product market fit as an example. Would the reduction in customer acquisition costs indicate that you are there, as a case in point?
Well, yeah, what you probably have is some sort of benchmark for what you think is viable for your business. Like if we don't get our cost of sales down to here, we don't have a business, something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's a good example of what I was talking about before, of a real problem to solve. You can go to the product team and say, look, currently our cost to acquire customers here, which means we're like burning money. We need to get it here. That's a totally reasonable and good assignment for a product team.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about product vision for a second and its relationship to KPIs. So as a company ourselves, we've, did a whole vision exercise, not like a vision statement, but like a proper 23-year roadmap sort of thing, and articulated all the products and the culture and all this kind of stuff. And that's got to translate into product, right? And that's kind of where we are as a team. But what is the relationship in your view, or what advice do you have between a vision, founder vision, whatever the case might be, to setting KPIs around that? What is the relationship between, that sort of dynamic?
Well, now you're getting to what really are the responsibilities of your leaders when it comes to product. And that, not accidentally, is the topic of the new book, Empowered. That is, right. So it starts, that literally starts with product vision typically. Well, really it starts with company objectives and the purpose or the mission of like, why do you exist as a business? But that's easy. Like Google says, organize the world information. That's a mission statement. It's not a vision. And it's good. Everybody pretty much has one. But the real point is, how are you going to do that? And that's where it starts getting interesting. The product vision plays a major role. The product vision typically drives two big things. It drives the architecture that you need to support that. And it also drives what's called the team topology, which is how are you going to structure your product teams to deliver that? And then most importantly, that vision and the topology drives the product strategy. And product strategy is another one of those big differences between good companies and the rest, is they actually have a product strategy, which really helps us know how to get the most out of our teams. And the product strategy is where we come up with those problems to solve. And, so we're really getting into heavy things. Now, the product strategy will turn into specific problems to solve and specific measures of success. And those measures of success are where those KPIs are most visible. Every team has a set of business KPIs that they're focused on. And it comes from the product strategy, which was derived from the product vision. That's probably a lot more than what you wanted to hear, but
no, not at all.
That's why it takes 400 pages, in this book to kind of describe what leaders are responsible for.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right? It's like this, just to your point, the first thing we discuss is all the things that can potentially go wrong, right? And so this is one of those. It's like measuring the wrong stuff.
And not measuring things at all is another common
exactly.
example. Another thing that goes wrong is teams don't even have any product strategy. I'm not exaggerating when I say they don't have product strategy. We were talking about Spotify before and how it sounds like we're both kind of fans of Spotify. But one company that I saw that I knew was destined to not do well is Pandora. Do you remember Pandora?
I know the name. Remind me.
It's another music service, which was actually pre-Spotify, but they really blew it because, and I didn't work with them, but they published how they actually decided what features to add. And that was published in a blog article. And as soon as I read it, I'm like, oh, well, I know what's going to happen to this company, because this is exactly what you do if you don't have any product skills and you don't have any product strategy. And the rest was history, unfortunately.
Well, funny thing is, I just Googled Pandora.com and I put it up on the screen here. Pandora isn't available where you are yet. So I guess that's pretty much.
Well, they basically they lost most of their value and they were acquired by Sirius XM, if you know them.
Yes. Isn't that Jeep's internal radio thing, satellite radio thing?
Yeah. And it's not, this is not the ending I think any of them hoped for, right, is the point.
Yeah, no, not at all. Just two quick questions, cognizant of time here, Marty. But the question I have for you is, and I have to ask this because I know all the entrepreneurs in the space will be like, Matt, please ask this one. But it has to involve funding, right? So this always comes up, and you're the product guy, Silicon Valley Group guy. So funding, do you take it? Do you not take it? If you can bootstrap it, do it yourself. Like, equity is the most expensive form of finance, blah, blah, blah. Where does the rubber hit the road here? What is your point of view?
Yeah, well, and just to be clear, I am not a venture capitalist. So the level of investing we do is minor, and it's in the companies we advise. So I am not a great person to ask. I can tell you that from the product perspective, the less funding you need to take, the better, which is obvious, right? But how do you do that? And that is, I do spend a lot of time with teams on how do you do this so that taking funding can be a good thing, but hopefully you do it not because you need it. That's the point. And the main way you do that is try to bootstrap yourself, at least until the point where you can show product market fit. If you can do that, if you can bootstrap your business until you get product market fit, you will be able to get more funding than you need or want, and you'll be able to have it on the terms that you deserve. We all absolutely hate the story, and I've seen it way too many times, where a founder basically gives away their company because they don't know better or they think they have to.
And that is the scary truth. I'm petrified of taking funding, but I love that advice. It hasn't been given on the show before. So thank you so much for that. Marty Cagan, why do you do what you do? Why do you care about all of this stuff? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, I have been super lucky to work on some great products, and I just love working with teams. You see this, I'm sure, on yourselves, and you're also the people you talk to. It's really fun to work with passionate founders that really care deeply about something and want to kind of make the world better in their own little way. And that's just doesn't get any better than that. And really, we are only 5 of us in Silicon Valley Product Group, but this is really what we want to do, is just help other teams do that.
Marty Cagan, you're an absolute legend, dude. Living legend for sure. Thank you so much for your time. Your book, obviously Empowered and Inspired, is available on Amazon. So guys, head on over there now. I'm definitely going to pick up a copy because it's super relevant for me as a CEO myself. So Marty, thank you for your time, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks, Marty. Thanks for listening to the Matt Brown Show, guys. Don't forget, you can catch me on all social media platforms for the latest updates, news, and a show history. So if you've been catching this on the podcast, please head on over to our YouTube channel and pound that subscribe button. It would be great to catch the video version there. And if you want a free copy of my #1 Amazon best-selling book, You're in a Game, for free right now today, you can grab that on mattbrownshow.com/ebook.